Hi friends, I welcome you all here at TNV Academy. Now, we shall start the clause 4 context of the organization. Clause 4 establishes the context of energy management system and underpins the rest of the standard. Organization will need to identify external and internal issues and the needs and expectations of its stakeholders and interested parties, as well as how value is delivered to them. This clause also partially addresses the concept of the creation of value. Here, the term issue covers not only problems or potential problems, but also important topics for the system to address, such as changing conditions, legal requirements, and other obligations. This clause 4 of ISO 22000-2018 also includes determining the scope of the energy management system. The scope is intended to clarify the boundaries that apply the energy management system. Additionally, Clause 4 requires organization to establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve the management system in accordance with the requirements of the standard. Clause 4 of ISO 22000-2018 has four subclauses, which are 4.1 Understanding the organization and its context. 4.2 Understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. 4.3 Determining the scope of the food safety management system. 4.4 Food safety management system. Let's start with subclause 4.1 Understanding the organization and its context. The subclause 4.1 of ISO 22000-2018 states that the organization is required to determine external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and that affect its ability to achieve the intended results of its food safety management systems, FSMS. As per this subclause, the organization is required to identify, review, and update information related to these external and internal issues. Subclause guide under a note that issues can include positive and negative factors or conditions for consideration. Clause 4.1 further specifies that the understanding the context can be facilitated by considering external and internal issues, including but not limited to legal, technological, competitive, market, cultural, social, and economic environments, cybersecurity and food fraud, food defense and intentional contamination knowledge, and performance of the organization, whether international, national, regional, or local. Now, let us talk here about the external and internal issues. This requirement of Clause 4.1 can seem excessively general, and there is a threat of going too wide when defining the internal and external issues. In fulfilling this clause, organizations should emphasize only on issues that can affect the consumer satisfaction and delivery of quality product or service. An organization's internal context is the environment in which it targets to achieve its objectives. Internal context can include its approach to governance, its contractual relationships with customers, and its interested parties. Things that need to be considered are related to the culture, philosophies, ethics, or ideologies inside the organization, as well as complexity of processes and organizational structure. To determine external context, organization should consider issues arising from its social, technological, environmental, ethical, political, legal, and economic environment. Some examples of external context may include government regulations, changes in the laws, economic shifts in the market, the organization's competition, changes in technology, etc. We should include some of the internal context as well, but are not limited to. Some of the examples of internal issues are structure of the organization, which has limited flexibility when dealing with varying demands, availability of reliable, qualified, and competent workforce, which is very positive, stability of workforce, where wage benchmarking is not consistent with competitors, Staff retention, which is also very high positive. Contractual arrangements with customers, which is beneficial to the organization. Payment terms from customers provides high credit. Solvency of customers and expansion of customer base also play an important role. The culture within the organization is equally important internal factor. Coming to subclause 4.2, understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. The subclause 4.2 of ISO 22000 specifies that to ensure that the organization has the ability to consistently provide products and services that meet applicable statutory, regulatory, and customer requirements with regards to food safety, the organization is required to determine the interested parties that are relevant to the FSMS and also the relevant requirements of the interested parties of the FSMS. As per this subclause 4.2, the organization is required to identify, review, and update information related to the interested parties and their requirements. The definition of interested parties is already explained under clause 3 of the standard. Some of the examples of interested parties are customers, employees, governments, manufacturers, investors, shareholders, suppliers, vendors, etc. The clause 4.2 of ISO 22000-2018 states that the organization must determine relevant interested parties and relevant requirements of appropriate concerned parties. Relevant interested parties to be considered are those that could affect or potentially affect the organization's ability to constantly provide products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. Monitor and review information related to interested parties and relevant requirements. Initially, the organization will need to define external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose, that is, what are the relevant issues, both inside and out, that have an influence on what the organization does. What would affect its capability to accomplish the intended outcomes of its management system? It should be noted that the term issue covers not only problems which would have been the subject of the precautionary action in previous standards, but also important topics for the management system to address, such as any market assurance and governance goals that the organization might set for its management system. Next, the organization has to determine relevant interested parties and relevant requirements of relevant interested parties. An interested party is a person or organization that can affect, be affected by, or recognize themselves to be affected by a decision or activity that's within the scope of the management system. There will be those external interested parties that enforce specific legal, regulatory, or contractual requirements in an organization. There may also be requirements specified by internal interested parties, for example, management and staff, which could be permanent and temporary. Let us talk about the subclause 4.3, determining the scope of the food safety management system. The subclause 4.3 of ISO 22000-2018 specifies that the organization is required to determine the boundaries and applicability of the FSMS to establish its scope. The scope must specify the products and services, processes, and production sites that are included in the FSMS. The scope must specify the products and services, processes, and production sites that are included in the FSMS. Clause says that the scope is required to include the activities, processes, products, or services that can have an influence on the food safety of its end products. Further, subclause 4.3 states that when determining this scope, the organization is required to consider the external and internal issues referred to in subclause 4.1 and the requirements referred to in subclause 4.2 of the standard. Subclause 4.3 of ISO 22000-2018 states that the scope must be available and maintained as documented information to meet the requirements of the standard. Let me talk about the subclause 4.4, Food Safety Management System. According to this clause, the organization is required to establish, implement, maintain, update, and continually improve an FSMS. The food safety management system must include the processes needed and their interactions meeting the requirements of the standard. Friends, till now it was about the clause 4 of the standard. For more information about our institute and other training programs, you can contact us through email or phone. I sincerely thank you all for your interest and attention.